Adam and Joe, did you know that the college students from Cranfield Forensic Institute in the United Kingdom have joined our efforts to recover and repatriate our fallen World War II heroes?
No, I didn't know this, but I think all the help that we can get because the number is as high as 80,000, I believe, from all the wars combined.
Yeah, which is a staggering number I wasn't aware of. Joe, did you know that there were that many?
I literally had no idea. I mean, honestly, it makes sense thinking about it, but it was one of those things that sadly, it didn't cross my mind until I started doing research. I mean, it really kind of threw me for a loop. And I felt a little guilty for not knowing that because that's, something that drastically impacts the livelihood and the emotional well-being of so many different families who've served. That's a huge number. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, thankfully, we've got all this help. The members of the Cranfield Recovery and Identification of Conflict Casualties team is deploying and has deployed across Europe in collaboration with the U.S. Defense Prisoner of War Missing in Action Accounting Agency to help bring our warriors home. Proof that our friends in England have been and remain so our most special allies. So bravo, Zulu Brits. Let's get this show started.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
So welcome, Alphas. Thanks so much for joining us in honor of our coming Memorial Day weekend. Defense POW-MIA Accounting Agency Director Kelly McKeague will be joining us later for the interview. We'll talk with him about DPAA's mission to provide the fullest possible accounting of our missing personnel to their families and to our nation. But before that, we have a little news you can use for this Friday, which is Poppy Day.
That's right. On the Friday before Memorial Day, we wear red poppy to honor the fallen and support the living who have worn our nation's uniform. The red poppy is a nationally recognized symbol of sacrifice worn by Americans since World War I to honor those who have served and died for our country in all wars. It reminds Americans of the sacrifices made by our veterans while protecting our freedoms. Since 1920, led by the American Legion Auxiliary, each year, members of the American Legion family distribute poppies with a request that the person receiving the flower make a donation to support the future of veterans, active duty military personnel, and their families with medical and financial needs. There are several ways you can participate in Poppy Day this Friday. One, you could wear a red poppy and tell people why. You can collect donations to donate to the American Legion Auxiliary Poppy Program. You can accept a poppy and make a donation where you see ALA members distributing them, or help your ALA unit distribute poppies. So share this story of who you are wearing your poppy to remember or support on social media, and use the hashtag Poppy Day. And lastly, you can share your poppy photos in our virtual garden on Instagram with the Poppy Day hashtag.
Just for clarity there, that's Poppy, Poppy Day, not Puppy Day. Poppy Day.
That's also a different day.
Great. It's a good hashtag also, but separate.
Okay, Elvis, please stick around. We'll be right back with Kelly McKeague right after the break.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
All right, today we are joined by Defense POW-MIA Accounting Agency Director, Kelly McKeague. Welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Joe, it's a privilege.
So
Yes,
happy
sir.
to have you.
Indeed, sir. It's an honor to have you with us on the show today. And I must admit that prior to today, I didn't know about the Defense POW-MIA Accounting Agency and all the incredible work that you and the organization have been doing. So for our listeners that may be in the same boat, the DPAA is an agency of the U.S. Department of Defense and was formed from the merger of several smaller agencies in 2015. Its mission is to locate, identify, and repatriate the remains of American personnel from past conflicts, including World War II, Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and the Iraq and Persian Gulf Wars, who are unaccounted for. So with that, sir, we're excited to learn more about the mission of DPAA today. But before we get into that, can you introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your career in the Air Force that ultimately led you to your current role as the director of DPAA?
Sure, Adam. One quick caveat. Don't feel bad about not knowing about DPAA. 31 years in the Air Force, when I first got introduced to this mission, I had no idea the United States did this to the degree that we do. I served a 34-year career in the Air Force. I started as a civil engineering officer. For those in the Navy, this would be a CB. For those in the Army, this would be a combat engineer. Halfway through, I transitioned to the Air National Guard, but even then, I spent most of my time in the Guard on active duty. My last job in the Air Force, and I was privileged to serve in this capacity, was I was the commander of the Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command, which at the time was at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam.
Well, I appreciate a fellow airman, if I can say that. So, General, welcome to the show, and thank you for your service too. I hope you don't mind if I take a moment to share a quick story, which I hope provides a little bit of context as to my understanding of the DPAA, but also for the listeners. I learned about the U.S.'s repatriation efforts back in 2017 after I met and photographed a veteran by the name of Enrique Hernandez. He served as a Marine Corps helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and his best friend and fellow pilot, Lieutenant Brent Eden Davis, was shot down and went missing in Vietnam on March 18, 1966. Sadly, his crash site was never found until search teams came upon the wreckage of an EF-10B Skynight and discovered nearby human remains on August 3rd, I think it was 1993. The remains really remained unidentified for 4 years as the Central Identification Laboratory in Hawaii painstakingly worked to identify this patriot. Finally, on December 2nd, 1997, he was reunited with his name and his family and promoted to the rank of major. He was later laid to rest with full honors at Arlington National Cemetery. So after meeting Enrique and hearing about his heart-wrenching story, I wanted to better understand the prolonged emotional toll that's involved with families who have to endure the time it takes to rediscover their loved ones and have them brought home. So I did a deep dive into the DPAA, and that's where I learned about the searches, your work. Can you share a little bit about the areas and the particular eras DPAA is currently searching in terms of the missing?
Sure. You know, Stacy, I would first offer that you hit the nail on the head. This is generational grieving. So I've been associated with the mission for now 10 years, 3 in uniform, 7 as a civilian. Naively, when I first started, I thought surely families have moved on. They have not. But in addition to families not moving on, veterans, these are their comrades in arms. They have a void in heart and mind from the loss. And so for us, this is something that we as a nation committed to. You know, after each conflict, there's always the recovery of remains from the battlefields. You know, we've done it in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, and throughout World War II and Korean War. But it really didn't start in earnest until after the Vietnam War, when a grassroots effort by wives, mothers, sisters, raise the nation's consciousness that we needed to do this in earnest. And that's where the flag that is kind of right here situated behind me, the black and white iconic POW-MIA flag first began. That's where the Remember POW-MIA bracelets were worn by citizens all over the country. So right now, our conflicts that we search for Americans missing from those conflicts begins with World War II and it ends with Operation Iraqi Freedom. And within that, those numbers they're staggering. There are over 81,000, I didn't misspeak, Americans missing from past conflicts. Now, of that, we estimate 38,000 to be recoverable, but still a daunting number. Right now, our limit is 200 feet of water that we can operate and excavate. But even with 38,000, you can see the numbers are daunting.
I first of all, again, I just want to say thank you so much. I love doing what we do because it gives me an opportunity to learn about things like this. I personally was in Fallujah 2004. I was attached to 2-1 Marines, and I personally found it very helpful to talk about, my warriors, my Marines, and our interpreter that we lost during and following that first assault on Fallujah. And it means so much that you're working to share these stories. So my question is, how do I get great hair like yours? As an alternate question, I hope that this is okay to talk about. I know that North Korea stopped communicating with us in March of 2019. And you've mentioned we have so much work to do in that area. And I couldn't find an update as to the DPAA's relationship with North Korea. Has there been any change in that relationship? And do you see any hope for us to be able to find some closure with cooperating with North Korea?
Yeah, Joe, unfortunately, fortunately, we work in 46 countries, and all 46, even China, even Russia, recognize this as a humanitarian effort. North Korea is the sole exception. And that's unfortunate on a number of reasons. First and foremost, there are 7,500 missing Americans from the Korean War. Of that number, 5,300, the majority, are in North Korea. And so for these families who long for their loved ones lost in 1950 to 1953, we are at a standstill simply because North Korea uses this as a weapon. Now, we had various unilateral turnovers in the early 1990s. We made a number of identifications from that. We actually operated with the North Korean Army for 10 years, from 1996 to 2005. We were always told, you will dig here, and here was Unsan and the Chosin Reservoir. And so from those 10 years, we picked up a number of remains that we identified of soldiers and Marines primarily. Fast forward, you'll recall that President Trump, it was unprecedented. He met with a senior North Korean leader, Chairman Kim, in Singapore in 2018. There were 4 commitments made. We were actually commitment number 4, which was to repatriate remains that North Korea was holding, as well as to resume joint operations. Now, thankfully, shortly after that summit, North Korea turned over 55 boxes. Now, they said these are 55 remains of service members. It turned out to be 501 bones, 250 different individuals. We have since identified 90 from those boxes and turned over 90 to the South Koreans, who are our strongest partner. We had 2 face-to-face meetings at the DMZ. We had numerous phone calls and letters exchanged. Regrettably, as you pointed out, March of 2019 was the last communication we've had. We've had multiple overtures, not just by us, but by the White House, by the Congress, by Americans, by veterans, family members, all to no avail.
Wow. Thank you for such a coherent answer to that. A lot of times this kind of stuff has to be spoken of very carefully, but the truth is, like you said, this is a humanitarian effort, and this is something that we would do for them even without them cooperating. And hopefully Absolutely. They can see the light. Thank you so much.
I think it really highlights the challenges of this mission, that it's not just about going out and collecting and finding and honoring the remains, but to have to navigate something as complex, as that makes it incredibly more difficult. During my 10 years in service, I was fortunate enough not to come into any scenarios that produced either POWs or MIAs. Although in aviation, we did prepare for that in training, at least on the POW side. So as a pilot, we went through CRC, where we focused more on how to survive, evade, resist, and escape as we got into a downed aircraft situation behind enemy lines. But that was very much focused on the individual's ability to survive, and how, and if captured, how could you return with honor. But on the inverse side of that, and thinking about that number, 81,000 missing Americans, and even how you alluded to the family members that help raise the conscious awareness to actually bring this program into existence. So what an important role the family member plays in all this. And had I become a POW, or ultimately been MIA, I can't imagine what it would have been like for my wife and young children to grow up without a father, and then the family member. So but you're creating good news stories, sir. So can you talk a little bit about what it means for those family members who finally get that closure as a result of the DPAA's work? Because I can only imagine, like you alluded to, it has to be one of the most significant moments and even in that moment, whatever it looks like is a ceremony, and that's a ceremonial moment that family will forever remember. Can you talk a little bit about that, or share any anecdotal stories that you may have?
Sure. Yeah, Adam, I think first of all, you hit the nail on the head. So if you look at the numbers as they're spread across the wars, the numbers come down precipitously. World War II, 72,000, Korean War, as I mentioned, 7,500, Vietnam, 1,500, and the Iraq, Persian Gulf Wars, 6.
Wow.
Now, the reason for that, and you hit the nail on the head, we as a military got better at combat search and rescue. We got better at ensuring that no matter what the cost, the ethos of never leave a fallen warrior behind, we fulfilled. And so you see the numbers, they're incredible. And I juxtapose the fact that after 20 years of combat in Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, zero MIAs. I find that extraordinary. And again, we got better as a military with ensuring that, again, sparing no cost and ensuring that all remains were picked up and brought home where they belong. So families that were part of service members who made the supreme sacrifice after the wars, World War II, Korean War, Cold War, Vietnam. As I mentioned earlier, there is a significant void in heart and mind. And you would think that families have moved on. They have not. You may talk to a family member today that never knew the service member, their relative. They know everything about the service member. They know the stories, they know the laughters, all of that were passed down from generation to generation, such that when you're speaking to them, it's as if you're speaking to the service member's mother. We find that extraordinary. So if we are able to provide the ultimate answer, which is the answer they've sought for generations, that their loved one is coming home, you can imagine the euphoria that is in the family, and it permeates not just to the family, but to the community. I remember last year we identified in the 70th anniversary of the armistice that ended the Korean War, the 70th year of the ironclad US-South Korea alliance, we identified Corporal Luther Story, who was born in Buena Vista, Georgia. He was the son of sharecroppers. He got his mother to fudge his enlistment papers. He had dropped out of high school, got his mother to fudge his enlistment papers, enlisted in the Army at 16, became an infantry soldier. He deploys to Korea, and literally 3 months after the conflict started, he was overrun when his unit was beset with a reinforced Chinese, North Korean unit. 19-year-old Luther Story stayed behind, firing every weapon, throwing every grenade to allow his unit to escape to safety. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. In fact, General Omar Bradley presented the medal at the Pentagon to his father in 1951. When remains were exchanged by both sides after the conflict ended, unknown set of remains came to our possession. They were unidentifiable. They were buried at the National Cemetery in Honolulu. We are in the process of disinterring those unknowns. And last year we identified Corporal Luther Story. He had a sister and a brother. They're both passed, but his sister had a daughter, Judy Wade, who, as you can imagine, was just overcome with joy. She actually came to Washington with her husband when South Korean President Yoon met with President Biden for the anniversary. And at the Korean War Memorial is where the Bidens and the Yoons met with the Wades in front of the tablet that had her uncle's name inscribed in it. And one final story about this, because I think this is so indicative of what we do as Americans and why this is emblematic of our values. His family were sharecroppers, as I mentioned, and worked a farm owned by President Carter's father. When we identified Corporal Story, they told the president, who was in hospice, that Luther Story was coming home. Without a doubt, quickly, President Carter got the biggest smile, his eyes twinkled, and he said, "I remember that boy, and I'm glad that hero is now home." Mm. And by the way, this is just a story, no pun intended, that is shared by families who get their loved one back. And more importantly, by a community that welcomes their hometown son or daughter home.
Man.
Well, thank you for sharing Corporal Story's story with us, sir. And that's the point that I was going to highlight too, is this is one story of the many that are similar in nature. Because even though that the accolades and the events that surround it may not be the same, the result for the family is the same. It's ending that generational trauma, and it's permission to take that weight off. And it's a physical process with spiritual and emotional ties to it. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, man, this episode is unexpectedly making me make me feel all the feels, sort of pride in our nation's efforts, and sadness for the families who are waiting, and very happy for the families who've had resolution. I want to kind of figure out what exactly the type of undertaking this is per individual, because it's not like we have these opportunities to get a box of what you said was 50 remains, and it turned out to be 150. Usually it's painstakingly one crash site at a time or one location at a time. So I can only imagine, and I'm not the scientist and you're the director, so is it forensic archaeologists, translators, researchers? What do these teams look like from start to finish? I mean, I can imagine that takes months, if not years, to accomplish once you've identified where you want to start.
Yeah, Stacey, you hit the nail on the head. These are the hard cases. If they were easy, they would have been found shortly after the conflicts ended. So again, it can take months, it can take years in many cases. And it's really the most eclectic organization I've been a part of. We have over 725 individuals, 55% civilians, and military that come from all four services. Of course, it ends with the science, where we have archaeologists, anthropologists, odontologists, forensic dentists that end up with a set of remains, material evidence that they then try to put a name to that evidence. But it begins with historians, researchers, military intelligence analysts, and everything in between. So I'll give you an example. We have, like you, Stacey, photographers from all four services. And what they do is they travel with the team that deploys, and they document the forensic evidence that's found. And Joe, we actually have corpsmen. We have medics, we have Air Force IDMTs, because these teams, when they deploy, usually about 15 people, they're in remote, austere environments. And so they need that corpsman with which to be able to attend to any medical emergency. And so you have this continuum of historical research, of looking through archives, looking at aerial imagery, trying to piece together what is an area this size. And if they can narrow it down to something smaller, we will send what we call a field investigation team. They will then try to narrow it down to even more. And if we're able to do that, we will send an archaeologist, anthropologist-led team with which to excavate. And it's backbreaking, intensely meticulous work, searching through jungle, debris, searching through mounds of earth, sometimes 20 feet deep, in order to hopefully find evidence that might prove a correlation to the loss in that area. I'll give you an example. I mentioned China that we're working with. China is actually the only country where we have losses from 4 conflicts in China: World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War, and Cold War. We sent a team to China in January to look at 2 World War II sites. Now, the only reason we were able to do that, and by the way, the PLA were very cooperative in us doing so, is because the historians, intel analysts, GIS specialists were able to take these sites and literally put a team in there to say, go look for any signs of aircraft wreckage. That investigation was very successful. We will go back in July and actually excavate one of those sites simply because work that was done here resulted in success here. And if found, any evidence, any and all evidence goes to one of 2 laboratories. They're the preeminent laboratories in the world. One at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii and one at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, where the scientists will then spend inordinate amounts of time trying to analyze that evidence. And then concurrently, we work hand in glove with the most preeminent DNA laboratory in the world. It's the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory out of Dover. And they do absolutely incredible work to use that DNA line of evidence to, again, hopefully put a name on those sets of remains.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because it has to do with DNA, and I'm so glad you left off with that, because how important is it for these family members to provide, say, buccal swabs and things like that to help you guys identify them?
Huge, hugely. In fact, we use 7 lines of evidence, DNA being one of them. For those of us that entered the military after 1992, when DNA became a thing, we all did the blood drop on a card, we did a cheek swab. But for everybody before 1992, we need something to compare it against. And so we are desperately dependent upon family reference samples. Now, the good news is DNA technology has improved such that if you are a family member 4 generations removed from the service member and you provide us your DNA, we can use that as an identification. And so right now for the Vietnam War, we're in good shape. We have 90% of the missing. A family member has donated DNA. Korean War, 94. But for World War II, and here's where my plea is to your members who in many cases might have a loved one who served in a prior conflict, we're only at 20%.
Oh, wow.
Congress didn't ask us to proactively search for World War II missing until 2010. So we're playing catch up. We have to do that historical research, and that's where we're at right now. And so we are building the database when it comes to family reference samples that we have on file. And it's a simple case of your members calling, emailing the service casualty office. They will send a kit, DNA kit. It's a simple cheek swab on the inside of your cheek, FedEx it back, and we will have it on file, protected, meeting all the HIPAA security concerns, and have that on file just in case there might be a loved one whose remains we find.
Wow, thank you.
Wow, that's and like Stacy, the feels. This is like unexpected for me. So I spent some time on the website, a little last night and some this morning, and I was not expecting those stories to hit me the way that they did. Even I, somebody that is unrelated to these warriors, felt a sense of closure reading them, which kind of threw me. It really does make me realize that when you get involved with veterans, it means all veterans. Of course, I love my guys that I served with, have a special place in my heart, but they're not alone. All these POW-MIAs and people that I've been hearing about my whole life are in there too. And so I imagine it's impossible, especially from somebody like me on the outside, if I can feel it, it's impossible not to feel a sense of personal connection to these people as you work on gathering and compiling all the information. So my question is, I would love to hear the good thing. I want to hear what it's like when one of these warriors are finally found. Can you share what the end of this process looks like in your office? Because I'm sure that there's some sort of tradition or some sort of something that happens at some point, even if it's just a text, like we found, can you share what that's like, the end of that process? Because I think that would be a really incredible moment.
Yeah, Joe, the MIA is the term that most people are familiar with, but we also look at them as unreturned veterans. These are veterans who made the supreme sacrifice and have not come home. Their families are Gold Star families, and we don't think of Gold Star families from the sense of anybody who lost their life, before OIF or OEF, but they are Gold Star families. One would think that when we're looking for 38,000 that we estimate to be recoverable, that we would be inured to kind of looking at them as just this amorphous number. Absolutely not. There is a case by case. There's a connection made, whether it's the historian who becomes enamored of just searching through battlefield records, archives, aerial imagery. There's that instant connection. Whenever the team goes to excavate a site, they will take a large board that they will construct and put it at the site of a picture of the service member, the circumstances of loss, and every team member, as soon as they come to the site, and it's 12, 13, 14 hours of backbreaking labor, sees that, is inspired by that, and more importantly, looks at that as their absolute sworn job, duty, to hopefully find them. Fast forward, when remains come into the laboratory, our scientists conduct their work in the blind. What that means is that they're not told where the remains came from. They're not even told where the remains, what conflict it came from or what country, so that they're able to provide an unbiased analytical assessment of the remains. So when a set of remains is identified, when that name is placed on it, you can imagine it is a great joy. So our outreach and communications folks have public releases. There's a sense of pride within our agency, particularly if you were associated with it. And again, whether or not you were the historian that honed in on that site, whether you were the logistician that did the planning, whether you were the personnelist or the financial management person that ensured that that team deployed, or the scientists, everybody has a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and a sense of ownership that they somehow contributed to that set of remains. Now, when somebody is identified, we are not the ones to notify the family. Now, I know that sounds like a letdown for us in DPAA, but again, it makes sense. We turn the information over to the Service Casualty Office. They will then in turn inform the family along with, and I'm sure many of you, all of you, perform the duty as a casualty affairs officer. That CACO is the one that from that service will present the findings, our findings to the family, and then arrange the full military honors burial. And this is what I love about our country. Even if it's a single tooth, and there are instances where all we are able to find is a single tooth, that service member will be afforded a full military honors burial. I find that extraordinary that here we are, decades later, still searching, still finding, identifying, but more importantly, properly honoring them as we should.
I love that. Thank you so much. That was a great answer.
I think next, sir, when I was doing research to learn about this, one of the things that was really helpful was the agency video, the DPAA agency video that you have. So I highly encourage our listeners. I believe it's on the website on the top level, but you can also search DPAA agency video on YouTube. It's a 9-minute and 14-second video, and it does a great job of really in that amount of time highlighting a lot of the things that we're talking about here. But there was a great comment that I wanted to read for you, and then get your take on, sir, down in the YouTube comments. So this one comes from XX 3 Days Grace 2XX is the username. And they say, my forensic anthropology professor referred our class to a few of your videos. This one in particular, I'm sure I have some very different views that many of the people who would typically be involved. I do not always agree with the choices of our government, but I always 100% of the time support our troops past, present, and future. This endeavor makes me proud to be an American. I got chills watching the video. Every human should have the right to not be forgotten, but especially those who lay down their lives in often foreign lands for our freedoms, rights, and protections. Thank you to everyone at the DPAA. Maybe one day I'll work with some of you. It would be an honor. So that's a pretty awesome comment there on multiple levels. And I would also say that I got chills watching the video as well. But hey, maybe XX 3 Days Grace, because this was 2 years ago, maybe they are working for you at this point, sir. Can you talk a little bit about, because of the level of expertise and on the cutting edge of science, but then also within, the Department of Defense, and you're, coordinating across nations and stuff. So I would assume that, it's a broad team of skills and abilities. Are you guys currently looking for, or what might a path into this work be?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have outreach recruiting fairs where we will go to the American Society of Military Historians. We were just with the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. And again, it's drawing talent, and it's amazing how these very intelligent, talented young people know a lot about DPAA, simply because our historians, our scientists are preeminent in their field. Absolutely. I mean, they are just world famous. Same way with the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, preeminent scientists in the world. And so again, for us, it's drawing them to a noble, sacred, purposeful mission, one that anybody, whether you're in uniform or not, can immediately, instantaneously be associated with, and more importantly, be proud of that association. And so again, we welcome opportunities for volunteers, interns, and our website, www.dpaa.mil, has information on how people can volunteer, how they can serve as interns, or even look for job opportunities.
Thanks for that, sir. Appreciate it.
Adam, be quiet. I'm just joking. I watched your recorded speech that you did for the DAV in 2021. It was one of the things I watched. So I know that you are involved with these national conventions. And I think that's probably the best way to get some of these DNA swabs that are needed for the World War II vets. So I was going to ask, are you planning on having some representation at some of these national conventions in the future? And if not, what can I do to help?
We are always at the invitation of all the major veteran service organizations. Our deputy spoke at the Legion in Charlotte last year. We haven't received an invitation to New Orleans this year, but I'm hopeful. I spoke at Phoenix when the national convention was there. The other thing that helps too is that your national leaders often, annually, visit us. I met Dan Seehafer when he and the American Legion Auxiliary President and Sons President came to Hawaii in December. Lisa Williamson, the Auxiliary President, was at our Offutt Laboratory earlier this year. And again, these are opportunities for us to interact with veterans who, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, these are their comrades in arms. They are as invested in this, maybe not as much as a family, but as invested in this as anybody. And so we're very privileged to be a part of national conventions where we, again, get the word out. But I will tell you that the Legion at the grassroots community level does extraordinary work. I have not been to many funerals of an MIA coming home where I haven't seen the Legion riders come out en masse, where the Legion comes forward and offers assistance to the family in terms of maybe a luncheon or what have you. You know, Legion posts and departments proudly fly the POW-MIA flag over their buildings. And then your members, as they come to Washington to speak to their members of Congress, talk about how important this is for this nation, not to just sustain this effort, but to commit to it and ensure that it has the resources with which to, again, achieve more successes in the future.
Man,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for giving us such motivation to want to not just continue to support, but maybe come out in force, especially with that DNA effort. Maybe that's something the Post can also take on too, and getting those efforts off the ground. And I kind of just want to share something in doing my research. Want to kind of harken back to what Ronald Reagan said. The late President Reagan said, "We write no last chapters, we close no books, we put away no final memories until our questions are answered. Your husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers did their duty by this nation, and this nation will do its duty by them." So for all that you do, sir, and the teams that are out there right now with their fingers in the dirt, doing the hard work, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really, really appreciate it. My last question for you is, have you been out to some of the sites, and what's your final takeaways from those?
Stacey, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that President Reagan quote. We actually use it in our video that Joe mentioned. It's a beautiful video, and it, you know, I've seen it, who knows, 1,000 times, and I still get choked up every time I see it. You can't help but do that. I would say that, again, Legion members, American citizens in general, should be very proud and almost taken aback by the level of effort that this nation provides to ensure its warriors come home. It's something that we in DPAA, we're just an instrument of the nation. And if we're able to, again, contribute answers, not just for a family, but for a community, a hometown, there is no greater sense of value and appreciation in the world. And the fact that we will continue to do this, given the fact that the numbers are daunting, backed up by talented civilians, talented service members that, again, pour their heart and soul into this effort, is absolutely extraordinary. One other thing I would offer is that we actually have the authority, unique in all of the Department of Defense, to establish private partnerships. And these are universities, non-governmental organizations that we have entered into a partnership with. They do incredible work. They bring capacity and capabilities that augment what we're doing. We also are able to augment with the combatant commands, specialties like medics, EOD technicians, divers, mountaineers that we lack inside the agency. And on the order, each and every fiscal year, we're asking the combatant commands to give us 500 to 600 service members, even photographers.
Oh man, I had the opportunity to join one of those teams, but I was at Combat Camera and they said, "You're going to Iraq instead." I'm sorry I missed that opportunity.
Lucky you.
Right. Well, but there were several other fantastically talented photographers who I know that did go and are still out there, particularly in Vietnam, doing those efforts. And so thank you so much for.
Hey, Stacey, real quick, a quick commercial. Fellow airmen like you, if you go to our website and Google Leah Ferrante, technical sergeant, she does a biopic, sort of an interview of her experiences working as a combat camera photographer on many of our sites. It's a beautiful tribute. She did it on her way out when she PCS, but Leah Ferrante, in fact, I'll have Sean send it to you. It'll make you cry. It makes me cry.
I will be putting that on my watch list.
Well, sir, we're so grateful and appreciative to you for coming and spending some time with us here today, sharing about the mission and the work of DPAA and all the incredible things that you're doing. And I can't state that enough. You're helping to heal generational trauma and grieving through one found remain at a time, and the processes by which you guys prescribed yourselves to. And I think, you know, for our listeners and for me, I knew absolutely nothing about this program, shamefully so, before it started. So I do appreciate you saying not to feel shameful. But I think one of the greatest things that we can do is just promote the awareness of it, because I think it's some of the best use of funding that could possibly go to honor these servicemen and women in this way. And anything we can do to bring that attainable 38,000 down, well, I believe that you're already doing it, sir. So with that being said, before you sign off, is there anything else that you would want to share with our listeners that we haven't discussed already?
Adam, Joe, Stacy, thanks again for the opportunity to be part of your podcast and more importantly, connect with your membership. You know, I mentioned the fact that families obviously have the biggest stake and investment in this. I mentioned veterans also have a stake in this, but also for those that currently serve in uniform today, if they know that their nation, that they're going to answer the call to duty, that should they go missing, they know that if the nation is doing everything humanly possible for a fellow comrade in arms who was lost 80 years ago, what are they going to do for me if I go missing today? And to me, that speaks volumes about this sacred obligation, this moral imperative, not just for the families, not just for veterans like your Legion members, but also for those that serve in uniform today. To me, this is what America is all about.
Thank you again so much.
Well said, sir. Thank you.
We're going to have links to all your social connections and anything we talked about on the show notes, but feel free, you know, we'd love for you to drop the website and any socials that you wanted to share as well. Where can folks learn more about the DPAA?
Yeah, we're on every platform, X, formerly Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. You know, if they just go to DPAA, Delta Papa Alpha Alpha, we'll come up on every platform that's out there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, www.dpa.mil. It's a beautiful website, not just telling you about the mission, but more importantly, with these vignettes of service members that are now home and the impact that it's had.
It is tasteful and warming. It's concise. It's not dramatic. That's what worked on me was, you know, reading those stories, and it felt like a celebration of knowledge. So thank you again so much.
My privilege.
All right, General, thank you so much for visiting us today. And Alphas, stick around for some scuttlebutt right after the break.
The American Legion is raising awareness about PTSD and veteran suicide by offering hope, camaraderie, and support.
Be the one to help end veteran suicide.
Be the one to save one veteran.
Be the one to ask a veteran in your life how they're doing.
Be the one to reach out when a veteran is struggling.
Go to betheone.org and help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Will you be the one?
Where's my horn? Okay, Alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some scuttlebooty.
As I began preparing for this episode, I wanted to get an idea of what the average American knew about the mission to return our patriots. So I did a deep dive, as I love to do, on Reddit using the keyword search POW and DPAA. I found an eye-opening thread, something even I wasn't aware of, which makes me feel super ignorant. Though that's not saying much anyway, is it? But anyway, the thread was about Cold War era missing in action. One person said, "There are missing service members from the Cold War? ? What? ? And somebody responded, "Yes, 126 missing service members from the Cold War." Listen, I had no idea. So I put on my journalism hat and went to some investigating modes to real media sources and news outlets to confirm or deny whether this Reddit thread was actually true. And the answer is, my fellow Alphas, yes. According to a March 2024 DPAA report, 126 U.S. service members are still unaccounted for from the Cold War. I was curious as to when, where, and how these folks went missing. my research revealed that all of them were aboard one aircraft or another that had been shot down by the Soviet Union and or their Communist Party allies. Most disturbingly, during my research, I found out that in 1992, Russian President Boris Yeltsin told a committee that the Soviet Union had held survivors of spy planes shot down in the early 1950s in prisons or psychiatric facilities. Russian Colonel General Dmitry Volkolganov, co-leader of the U.S.-Russian Joint Commission on POW-MIAs, said that, to his knowledge, no Americans were currently being held against their will within, man, coming from the Soviet Union, I don't know how much I trust this person's word of mouth, but again, he said to his knowledge, he doesn't know of any Americans being held against their will, and I think that's the key word, against their will, within their borders from the Soviet Union. The Select Committee concluded that it, quote, found evidence that some U.S. POWs were held in the former Soviet Union after World War II, the Korean War, and Cold War incidences, and that it, quote, cannot, based on its investigation to date, rule out the possibility that one or more U.S. POWs from past wars or incidences are still being held somewhere within the borders of the former Soviet Union. Holy crow, guys.
That's scary. I mean, honestly, go ahead. I mean, but I was gonna say honestly, the thing that's so scary about that is that lack of information. It'd be one thing to know for sure one way or another. And I think we can infer that something somewhere happened where we never got information on. But knowing like these conflicting things kind of throw you, because it's like, you want to have hope that they never did anything, that they released all information they had or all POWs, but this conflicting stuff makes me wonder, what else do we not know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say that, my service time, anything to do with POW, KIA, MIA has really been centered around, training for that most part, especially with like SEER school. So the amount of time that I spent thinking about potentially folks missing from the Cold War eras is absolutely zero. And I kind of find it surprising in the same way that this Reddit user did. So this is like very natural, I think, kind of like line of thinking. So like I'm learning about this for the first time as well. But then like, you hear about the spy, aspect of it. And so I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense that that's how it would come about. But like I'm with Joe, like completely like shocked that there could potentially be service members
Yeah.
that are
yeah.
still or in some capacity or any capacity.
Yeah, so in doing that research too, guys, I also found out that DPAA, these are one of those probably groups of people we will not be able to recover, in that so many of them went down after being shot down, their aircraft were shot down. These crews went down in bodies of water. And because of the sort of, he said, 200 feet depth is what their maximum depth currently is. I unfortunately for those family members, I guess fortunately the crews went down together. So, the crews weren't alone. They had their brothers and sisters alongside each other. Unfortunately for the family members, it may be some time before we get the technology where we can do those deep dives. And most of these bodies of water are somewhere in the vicinity of China. And so thankfully, if we have their cooperation, maybe we can work together to repatriate our friends.
I just want to say also that the thing that's concerning about, to clarify my point earlier of what do we not know, is what benefit would they have for not cooperating? And it's, I don't want to bring up any potential, because it's all conjecture, but it scares me that they're not willing to cooperate. What are they worried about us finding out or knowing? So, going on a different vein here, that's, we're going from really heavy, but the Coast Guard's only Medal of Honor recipient died rescuing Marines. So over a month into the hellish fight for the control of Guadalcanal, then Marine Lieutenant Colonel Louis B. Chesty Puller ordered elements from the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines to conduct an exploratory mission to the Peninsula Point Cruz along the Matanikau River. So that region of the island was used as a staging area for Japanese forces to regroup and launch further attacks, particularly against the tenuously held Allied airfield dubbed Henderson Field. Through miscommunication and miscues, the reconnaissance mission quickly turned deadly. On September 27th, a message from the group was either misinterpreted or ambiguous, leading division headquarters to believe they had crossed the river and were fighting there. According to the National World War II Museum, this resulted in the order for 3 companies of 1st Battalion, 7th Marines to go ashore via landing craft on the beach west of Point Cruz and enter the attack from the rear. On that date, Petty Officer in Charge Douglas Munro led the group of 24 Higgins boats and deposited nearly 500 Marines on the beachhead with the mission to wipe out the Japanese staging area. So within an hour of landing, however, the Marines were in danger of being pushed back into the sea amid crushing Japanese bombing raids and gunfire. The Higgins crews were still refueling when they received the message that the Marines needed to withdraw immediately. When asked by his commanding officer if the Coast Guardsmen were able to go back and extract the overwhelmed Marines, the 22-year-old Munro reportedly gave a confident, "Hell yeah." Chills. I love it. I love it. So the Marines were being driven back to the beach, and many did not have radios to request assistance. According to the USO, a single "help" spelled out in T-shirts on the ridge near the beach sent a loud and clear signal to those looking on. Wow. So under constant strafing by enemy machine guns on the island, and at great personal risk of life, Munro daringly led 5 of his small craft toward the shore, according to his Medal of Honor citation. As he closed in on the beach, he signaled the others to land, and then in order to draw the enemy's fire and protect the heavily loaded boats, he valiantly placed his craft with its 2 small guns as a shield between the beachhead and the Japanese. As he used his landing craft to shield the beleaguered Marines from withering enemy fire, an enemy bullet struck the base of Munro's skull. His best friend and fellow crewman, Raymond J. Evans, grabbed the wheel and continued Munro's mission until the Marines were safely back at the Ally-held location of Lunga Point. It was there that Munro regained consciousness and asked his final question: did they get off? Evans replied that they had, with Munro reportedly dying with a smile on his lips. Munro was posthumously awarded the nation's highest military honor in May 1943, with President Franklin D. Roosevelt presenting the Medal of Honor to Munro's parents, James and Edith. I just want to say, we joke around a lot between branches. You know, Adam and I and Stacy, we're all from 3 different branches and we have a lot of fun. But let me tell you something, I am absolutely proud to be an American and to serve beside such incredible people. It doesn't matter what branch you come from. Thank you. These kind of stories, I have been softened up today. It's not even funny. I am a mess.
I know. I was feeling a little misty-eyed as you were reading that citation and that story, because, man, we're just so lucky to have so many courageous people willing to risk their life for another person. I mean, that's the caliber of people in the military, and you gotta be proud.
He just did that for Marines. Those were not his guys he was protecting. He went there because
they were Americans, though.
They were Americans, and they were Marines, and he wanted to be there for them. And that circular sort of, that circular support that Marines and corpsmen have, that makes it where, you know, I'm going to come for you when you're hurt. So I know you're going to do crazy things to keep me safe. And to know that that extends throughout the branches is really beautiful.
I would just say something else that jumps out to me is the age of Petty Officer Douglas Munro, 22 years old. And we think about, you know, where we were at, you know, at 22 and the things that we were thrust into. And then even looking out at the, you know, landscape today, what are 22-year-olds most predominantly consumed with? And
MySpace.
This individual only had the gusto to say, hell yes, put me back in there and let me go. Let me use my ship as a guard to be able to allow the others to get off and to be able to get back and out of harm's way. And like the last thing that he did was regain consciousness. So fighting back from the land of the dead just to know that he accomplished his mission. Well,
good choice of friends, too. Yeah, Raymond Evans stepping up and continuing the mission, man. And both of you guys.
Well, and I think it's something we shouldn't overlook, too, is that the Coast Guard's role in conflicts. So many people think of the Coast Guard as being more domestic, which predominantly yes, but such extraordinary lengths by the Coast Guard and the work that they've done in so many of our global conflicts is, I guess, in my opinion, undervalued by media, because those of us in the sort of bigger branches tend to get bigger glory. Army Apache pilots.
There's nothing wrong with being a Huey pilot.
This individual deserves all the glory and
Yes.
mission accomplished.
Yes.
Daniel Butterfield could not read or write music, but he knew what he liked. A brigadier general in the Union Army who would go on to receive the Medal of Honor in 1892, just a little bit before your time, Joe, for gallantry during the Civil War. Butterfield was not particularly enamored with the bugle call that signaled lights out to U.S. troops at the end of the day. Butterfield was working for a company co-founded by his father, a little enterprise called American Express.
What?
When he joined maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you owe them some money. When he joined the 12th New York Militia, he was serving as colonel when the Civil War began. In September 1861, he was promoted to brigadier general, and Butterfield and his men soon found themselves at the Battle of Gaines Mill, Virginia, on June 27th, 1862. Butterfield was injured in the battle, and while recuperating during the month that followed, he summoned his brigade's bugler, Oliver Wilcox Norton, to solve his extinguish lights dilemma. The results of their collaboration was taps.
Wow.
While Butterfield lacked any musical background, he was an aficionado of bugle calls. Taps was not an original composition, but an inspiration from Butterfield's time in the New York militia when he learned about tattoo, a bugle call signaling the final roll call of the day. Assisted by Norton, Butterfield reworked the last portion of tattoo into taps. The call quickly gained popularity, first among other Union brigades and then crossing battle lines to the Confederate brigades. The Army officially recognized taps in 1874, almost a decade after the Civil War ended. And although Butterfield's revision was first played at a military funeral during the Peninsula Campaign, it did not become mandatory at military services until 1891. Butterfield, who resigned from the Army with the rank of Major General in 1870, was buried at West Point in 1901 at the age of 69, despite never attending the U.S. Military Academy. And yes, Taps, which has no official lyrics, was sounded at his funeral. More than a century later, Congress recognized Taps as the national song of military remembrance through the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. To request a bugler to play taps as a veteran's funeral, reach out to your local American Legion post or go to tapsforveterans.org. Wow, what a story.
I know,
Could you
right?
imagine? Go ahead.
No, I mean, I was thinking there are 3 songs off the top of my head that I know will definitely make me cry, no matter what. The national anthem, taps, and I'm not going to say the other one.
It's the Macarena.
Is it
I'll
a
let you
Whitney
know.
Houston song?
No.
Hey, that one gets me a little verklempt. But what is it? Lee Greenwood's "Proud to Be in that one."
An American? No.
Yeah.
I know. Okay. I'll keep that one to myself.
You can tell us later, and I'll tell everyone. Could you imagine though writing a bugle song that people are going to be like jamming out to? Well, jamming is the opposite of the right word, but listening to 160 years later, like that's pretty cool. But that song's kind of a banger.
I like that he was not particularly enamored with the bugle call that signaled lights out.
I bet he hated it. You don't write a whole song unless you hate something.
And he's like, why do I need this bugle call telling me what to do? I know when
I
I need to
mean,
sleep.
it is contradictory or it is counterintuitive to sleep, because as you're finally
Drifting
sort
off
of
to sleep.
drifting off, Like, geez,
You know what
we
would
need to
really
rewrite
cross me the
this
divide
song.
between conscious awakening and unconscious sleep is this bugle call.
Oh,
But on
man.
the other side of that, going on to then, create a tap. So it's a incredible story, and one of the most prominent things and part of the remembrance ceremony. So
Remember the first time you heard taps, Adam?
as I don't know. I don't have a memory that specifically stands out prior to military service. But I do know that while we were in flight school during the surge in Iraq, we had a surplus of warrant officers and officers, and one of the details that we would have was a funeral detail. So distinctly remember at that period in my life, hearing it, and how absolutely compelling it is in that environment and setting, and what it means for the family members getting to hear it. It's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that it's good every once in a while to sort of step into the heavier side of what we do, and to talk about some of these heavier things that today is all about. And so the discussion of honor and remembrance is one of the core values of members of the American Legion, as stated in our preamble, which is to preserve the memories and incidents of our associations in all wars. And I think that that's something that we've tried to do in our lives, and it's something that we're still learning how to do better. And I'm really happy to be here with you guys doing this today. So
Yeah, same.
I love you guys. You're my friends. Easy to the heart. Nice.
All right, Alphas. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, or send us mail and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. And for all of our fallen brothers and sisters, until Valhalla, we'll see you next week.